cause them to fail.
What the simulation shows is that the most likely, the weak point of the floor were the connections to the supports. And it might have started failing at those locations first. Either the external connection to the columns or the internal connection.
High-strength steel that had not been available before made this possible.
Building cranes were positioned on the internal steel framework made up of 47 heavy steel supports, indicating just how sturdy this internal structure was. However, the official theory explaining the collapse of the towers claims that an ordinary office furniture fire could actually be responsible for weakening heavy steel to the point of collapse. Imagine all the chefs who cook over a hot blue flame without melting their frying pans. The idea that a much weaker office furniture fire could cause any harm to these steel frame towers is pure fantasy, and therefore required a suitable dramatization to fool the public. A respected science show, Nova, faced the challenge of convincing the public that the impossible was actually the only possible explanation. To do this, it was first necessary to describe the steel supports in the towers as thinner and weaker than they actually were.
But the tall vertical columns of the inner core and the outer walls were like freestanding stilts.
The outside of each tower was covered by a frame of 14-inch wide steel columns. The centers of the steel columns were 40 inches apart. These exterior walls bore the majority of the weight of the building. The interior core of the buildings was a hollow steel shaft in which elevators and stairwells were grouped. The interior core of the buildings was a hollow steel shaft in which elevators and stairwells were grouped. The interior core of the buildings was a hollow steel shaft. The interior core of the buildings was a hollow steel shaft
Like, would it have been different had there been more supporting beams in a greater area around this building?
Well, frankly, it's hard to imagine a building having more steel than this structure.
Robertson tied them together with floor trusses.
The next step was to create a pancake collapse simulation. Since this is impossible using the laws of science, it was first necessary to remove the outer wall supports that carry 40% of the tower's weight. Since office fires would have negligible effect on the steel structure, it was also necessary to remove all floor connections with the internal support structure. Finally, the simulation would run. But will 110 floors really collapse like pancakes in 10 seconds? Let's time it to find out. The first floor to collapse took 1.5 seconds to fall 12 feet. The second floor was faster at 1 second for a total of 2.5 seconds. As the gravity collapse starts to speed up, ignoring the hundreds of internal and external welded connections supporting each floor, we see 10 floors have collapsed after 6 seconds. This clearly indicates that the official pancake collapse theory cannot begin to explain how the buildings fell in just 10 seconds, and is so unreasonable that it should be immediately rejected out of common sense. Yet it has become the conventional wisdom of the day, and we must all pause and ask ourselves how this could have come about.
Been different had there been more supporting beams in a greater area around this building?
Well, frankly, it's hard to imagine a building having more steel than this structure.
Been different had there been more supporting beams in a greater area around this building?
Well, frankly, it's hard to imagine a building having more steel than this structure.
Been different had there been more supporting beams in a greater area around this building?
Well, frankly, it's hard to imagine a building having more steel than this structure.
The core of each tower was a rectangular pillar, 87 by 133 feet, comprised of 47 steel box columns ranging from 36 by 16 to 52 by 22 inches.
Inside there was the core, a rectangle of 47 columns made of 4-inch thick steel at the base. The cores combined might with ingenuity.
In October of 2001, Scientific American told us that they just don't build them as tough as the World Trade Center.
Been different had there been more supporting beams in a greater area around this building?
Well, frankly, it's hard to imagine a building having more steel than this structure.